Let me begin by saying, welcome, friends and partners. In the largest public inner-city transportation system in the world, both domestically and overseas. Actually, speaking to this group reminds me a little of the story I heard not too long ago about the fellow whose one claim to fame was that he had survived the Johnstown flood. Some of you may have heard it, but I think it's particularly appropriate today. This distinguished gentleman from Johnstown made a career out of telling everyone about the Johnstown flood. Finally, as will happen to all of us, he passed away, and as he entered the pearly gates, he was told by St. Peter that at the annual, or not the annual, but the daily cocktail hour, he would be called upon to tell about his one great adventure on earth, what was his contribution. And he said, "That's great. I'm going to tell about the Johnstown flood." St. Peter thought for a while. He said, "Well, you think that's appropriate?" And he said, "Yes, that was a hell of a flood, and I survived. And not many people did." St. Peter thought for a while, and he said, "Well, you're right, but just remember, Noah will be in the audience." So I feel a little bit about the fellow in the Johnstown flood talking to you people, because both by personal recognition and also by knowledge, industry knowledge, I understand that we have here today the people who make the system, the public service system that we know as the air transportation system in this world work. I had the distinct pleasure of addressing you one other time in Puerto Rico in 1975. As I recall, I don't often dwell on past speeches, but at that time I was a staunch and forceful and ineffectual defender of the regulated airline industry. Since that time, many things have changed, including my perspective on the relative values of a free market versus a regulated industry. Rather than talking about specifics, though, as wants to be the case today as we try to understand with the partisans or the declaimers of the deregulated effort in the United States, I'd like to recall with you a longer historical perspective on our industry. This is true, again, as I say, not just in the United States-wise, but worldwide. Because the airline industry has a remarkable history of service, of public service. At least in the U.S., it was conjured, carefully nurtured for 50 years. In that 50-year period, provided safe, efficient, reasonable transportation for a large percentage of our population. But in the post-war period, strange and new forces began to affect the industry that we all work in and we all love so well. Now, the result of this has been a period of the greatest transition in the history of the airline industry in the intervening 5 years since last we met in Puerto Rico. Let me explain, if I may, what I think these forces were. First, perhaps unseen to most of us, or at least unnoticed, we have had a general plateauing in the continual progress of subsonic aviation technology. What this means is that the industry has no longer the advantage of looking to the next better machine that cushioned so often in forms of immense increases in productivity, cushioned the ineffectual management, outlandish landing fees, and other problems of the industry. We came to expect that with each succeeding new airplane, there would be a monumental, indeed a whole order of magnitude increase in technology and productivity, and of course, that has rung out. There will be certainly some increases in the airplanes of tomorrow, but we no longer will expect and no longer can reasonably expect to achieve the enormous incremental increases we saw in the past. Second was another problem that has affected not only the United States economy, but the world economy in general. That's the insidious force of inflation as the governments of the Western democracies struggle to provide social services and social amenities in a manner that their fiscal means would not allow. The unseen and hidden thief of inflation has dramatically affected all of our futures and all of our fortunes here today. Let me give you a small example. A 727-200, which is still the standard airplane across the world, purchased new some 12 to 15 years ago, was on the order of $4.5 million. Of course, we depreciated against the $4.5 million machine, but when we go to purchase another 727-200 today, we find that the basic airplane, with about the same productivity, it's quieter, it has a little bit better fuel efficiency, but not a lot, costs $17 million today. The third and most obvious of these forces that shape our future has been the dramatic, unpredictable increase in our kerosene costs. Another example. Eastern in 1973 used 1,100,000,000 gallons of kerosene. Cost us $123 million. This year we'll use just about the same amount, 1,200,000,000 gallons of kerosene. Our cost will be well over $1 billion. Now, the convergence of these three forces, the plateauing of aviation technology, inflation, and the rapid increase in the price of kerosene, caused a heretofore unknown event to occur in the middle 70s, early 70s in the United States. The airline ticket began to go up at an unaccustomed pace. Now, it still went up slower than inflation, but nevertheless, after years and years of decrease in absolute value, with a tremendous increase in the product value, we began to see the increase in ticket prices that was afforded by the convergence of these three forces. Now, as these events became apparent, economists on both the left and the right suggested that one way to at least postpone, if not to subvert this insidious increase in ticket prices, was to go to the free market. You're all well aware of the argument. You were participants, many of you in the argument, as you were cajoled by the airlines and by government. The die has been cast on that, and I shall not take the argument up here today except to say that I believe, were it not for our ability to move our assets in response to the market, the airline industry today would be in very, very difficult straits. Now, that may sound strange to you when you recognize that as I speak in the United States, there are close to 20,000 airline employees on layoff, and I predict, I don't know, American may counter the trend. Bob can tell you about that this afternoon. But I predict that this year will be the worst profit performance in the history of the airline industry. I also submit to you that were it not for our ability to move and to counter some of these three forces that I have talked to you about, we would be in far greater problem than we are today. And strangely enough, from one who is leading a company who has never, in the past 25 years, had an adequate profit performance from the standpoint of ensuring our ability to raise the capital to invest in the machines that we need in the future. 25 years, Eastern has never reached the proper level, and there have only been 2 or 3 airlines that have. Strangely enough, as I speak to you today, my major concern is the fact that we, in response to these inflationary forces and the lack of productivity increases, both technological and personnel, may be pricing our product beyond the reach of the average traveler, not only in the United States but worldwide. Now, the ticket increases that we've seen in the past year have been enormous. It's true that the discounting has held the actual yield increases to about 20%. Nevertheless, the industry is sorely placed to face the future capital requirements that will be absolutely necessary if we look toward expansion, progress, and continued public service in the 80s. From the standpoint of our dealing with the airports, we have also entered a new and perhaps confusing period. How do you handle in a deregulated environment the capital requirements that are associated with long-term commitments like we just finished in Atlanta? I guess there was some $450, $500 million spent there, wasn't there, George? You spent about 150 of our money there, George. Thank you very much. How do you handle that when the airlines are committed to retire the bonds on a long-term basis and the airport operators want only short-term leases? How do you handle a situation where there are capacity constraints proposed, such as you have at Los Angeles? I think clearly a head in the sand approach to the future of air transportation. How do you handle it when you can't decide the number of slots that should be allocated in Washington National Airport? And I can only sympathize with the person that tries to run Washington National Airport so close to the mighty halls of Congress. Because if you people think you have a trouble, even you, Pat, come to Washington and see the confusion, the cooks that try to prescribe really the recipe for the future of that important airport. Well, let me tell you, if I may, in the next 5 to 10 minutes, not even that long, how I would propose we handle it. First, it's my unbounded belief that air transportation will remain the primary intercity transportation, public transportation system of the world, and I refuse to accept the fact that there are artificial constraints imposed either through constraint control, slots, or any other prospects that are raised by the profits of no growth. I think to espouse that philosophy is clearly detrimental not only to the traveling public, but to the economy of the individual countries. Now, how would you handle it? Well, first off, from the standpoint of the ADAP funds, I believe the fact that there is today a $3.5 billion surplus is a moot testimony to the fact that that program has failed. $3.5 billion, that at least is an entry in the government's ledger. I'm sure the dollars have been spent somewhere else, but there's a written entry. And still our airports are constrained. The other day I left LaGuardia, number 42 in line on a shuttle flight to Washington, D.C. No visible clouds in the sky over New York. We were told that there was swap in effect in western New York. And yet $3.5 billion of travelers' money, tax money, is in the ledger for preventing exactly that. From the standpoint of the many smaller airports around the country that still don't have adequate ILS equipment, that's a national disgrace. That's one of the main reasons that I have lost a great deal of sympathy for and confidence in the ADAP program. And although removing 72 of our large airports from the federal program may be too much, I believe I would find it far more comforting to deal with you on an individual basis and solve our problems without having to go through the great gods in Washington. I know that many of you don't agree with that, but I still believe that it remains a tremendous problem for us. The air traffic control system in this country, although I will attest to its safety, is woefully outmoded and badly needs to be upgraded, and some of that $3.5 billion ought to be spent immediately on that. And while it exists as a ledger entree, I can assure you that every administration will look for that funds to provide operating funds for the air transportation system. The other problem that I have as we look at growth is the fact that very few people are willing to face the fact that growth by and large has not come in the public air transportation segment, at least in the United States. The great growth has been in general aviation and business aviation. As a matter of fact, there are just about the same number of scheduled airline flights today as there were 10 years ago. Nevertheless, we argue over slots in Washington, D.C., and still allocate a certain number of slots to private airplanes. And I believe very, very firmly that this is a policy that must be reviewed. I support Massport. Now, that's a strange statement for me, but I support Massport's application of high landing fees to move general aviation to reliever airports where it belongs. And I want you to understand that I'm not speaking in a selfish motive from the standpoint of Eastern Airlines. I really believe that to the extent that airlines are successful in providing new reliever airports for general and business aviation, we should also help to fund them. So it's not a selfish act on my part. I also have a difficult time understanding why at Washington National, which is a great national asset, the servants of the people, i.e. the government airplanes, still have to remain there, be based there, and use slots that could be designated for commercial air transportation. I guess that Langhorne Bond isn't here, so I can get away with that one. Now, capacity and cost. How do we handle the cost situation? Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not certain. I know, as I told you right now, that the average ticket price is too high. And yet, as I try to understand how we cope with the inflationary pressures that we all know are coming, that are here today, particularly in the insatiable increase in kerosene, I don't understand exactly at this point how we maintain the transportation system of the world and still price it within the reach of really the person who is the backbone of our business, the person who works in a steel mill, the person who wants to take a weekend with his family and head to the vacation lands. I suspect it will be a combination of things. Number one, I'm certain that in our own interrelationship between the airlines and the airport operators, you will see an ever-increasing, and I suppose you would argue at this point that it couldn't be any greater, but you will be seeing an ever-increasing emphasis on our part to keep costs down. Not because we're trying to aggrandize the profits of the airlines. As I told you, in 25 years at Eastern, we haven't made enough to really justify our existence. I'm striving now, this year obviously is lost, but we're striving now to maintain a reasonable program to provide 2.5 to 3 cents on the dollar in the form of profits to buy a new airplane. Our employees are subsidizing profits at Eastern to the extent of 2 cents on the dollar. So you're going to find us, George McCarter and Eastern, very, very difficult to deal with for the frills, for the unneeded accoutrements, for the Taj Mahals that, frankly, don't seem to exist anymore. And I'm confident that the period ahead will be stormy, but I'm also confident that as partners in this business, and we are partners, we will work it out to the best extent of the traveling public. We will also see a greater trend in high-density seating because there's simply absolutely no question in my mind that the aviation technology of the 80s will not provide the increase in productivity that we need to offset the increases in inflation and fuel costs. Third, I think you're going to look forward to a period of labor unrest as the employees of the airline industry, accustomed to their annual wage increase and the many benefits that are common throughout our industry, are all of a sudden faced with the stark reality of layoff or some accommodation in their working conditions and their salary conditions. I'm extremely proud of the 40,000 people at Eastern who have been in this program, as I mentioned, to subsidize profits by their salaries if need be. You will also see, in my opinion, a continuing problem from our standpoint over access to airports. I tell you, I refuse to submit to artificial constraints. I still believe that airline scheduling committees are the best way to handle disagreements, and I look with grave distrust upon the entrepreneurs, the newcomers who come in with only one advantage, low-cost labor, and attempt to take advantage of hard-earned and long, expensively financed facilities. You will have a grave difference. I also look with tremendous suspicion upon auctions and consultant-produced gimmicks that are supposed to be the solution to all of our problems. Well, what will the future be? Coming from the From a person who has those thoughts, you perhaps might think I'm pessimistic. I'm far from it. We have indeed a very efficient system. We have a wonderful machine still in the airplane. We have a whole generation of young people who have accepted the airplane as the ultimate way to travel. We have the inflationary effects impinging both on automotive, bus, and the other great government subsidy and boondoggle Amtrak. And I firmly believe that we have a tremendous future in our industry. But most of all, what we have going for us, and I say this without any fear of contradiction and without any hesitancy at all, we have going for us in this industry worldwide a whole cadre of people like you and like the people in the airline industry in Portugal, American, Aeromexico, who really care about the service that they provide. This industry is not solely one that seeks to maximize profits. If we did, I guess you would count zero for all of us. We expect and need reasonable profits. But we are an industry that brings together people from all diverse countries, backgrounds, origins. We are indeed a social phenomena that's important not only in the U.S., but worldwide. And we have that wonderful relationship that exists in this room throughout the industry. Even though we may be antagonists at times, we have a wonderful propensity to solve our own problems. And I'm quite confident that they will be solved. Now, I've purposely limited my remarks, and I'd be happy to spend 5 or 10 minutes answering any questions if you have any. Except from the FAA. I can't speak to the chairman because we have several rude applicants. Thank God that we're deregulated domestically, though, I'll say. Amen. Amen. Any questions at all? What I would support as a substitute for ADAP would be a program, in essence, built upon the defederalization program that was embodied in the Cannon Bill, where I think there is still obviously some need for a ticket tax, but I would rather deal directly with Mr. Patarini, although he would rather go groveling to Washington and get his funds from there. I think that we have every reasonable opportunity. We, in essence, fund the airports anyway. And I would support defederalization, maybe not of all 72 airports, but of some of the larger airports, and direct funding on a negotiated basis through the users and the port authorities.
Mr. Borman?
Yes, sir.
Would you feel it appropriate, in light of your stated beliefs, that airports should charge you precisely what it costs the airports to furnish the facilities on which you land, take off, sell your tickets, and handle your customers?
The question is, would I feel it's appropriate that the airports charge the airlines exactly what it costs to produce the services that the airport provides? And the answer is yes. We have nowhere in the past looked for a free ride from the airport operators. The corollary to that is I would not expect in this industry the airport to provide a source of revenue for all sorts of good things that the community would expect to provide to the obviously deserving citizenry. In other words, I think the money ought to stay on the airport. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Without ADAP, without the customary funding that, by the way, is not airline money, nor is it our money, but it's money of passengers to provide the facilities they need, how would you feel that we fund general aviation, which is in existence, very big, and needs all the things that you need?
As I said, I believe that general aviation is an important part in the U.S. of the technology and the industry that's required for an advanced society, and I certainly am not anti-general aviation. I'm quite convinced they don't pay their own way at this point, and I really am not interested in subsidizing them other than to help them with reliever airports. Now, I do believe that there is a requirement for a certain level of federal taxation to provide the facilities, the air traffic control systems that are needed. My major concern is that the ADAP program is not spending the money to keep the system modern. And as you well know, we are in severe trouble today. I could list the airports. Los Angeles Airport is in serious trouble. Washington National, Eastern alone, we've approved on an expenditure authorization of Eastern over $10 million to improve our facilities at Washington National, and we have not been able to get a go-ahead one way or the other for 4 years. I think that's unreasonable to expect. Thank you very much, and I really mean it. I think we're all in a great industry. We respect you, and I want you to know that at Eastern, and I'm sure at American, I don't want to take any parochial advantage here, that George McCarter and the people that deal with you have really respect not only for your integrity, but for the concern you have for your individual cities. Pat, thank you very much.
I believe the remarks of Frank Borman reflect the thinking of AOCI. And in view of that, I think he should become an honorary member. The answers to some questions, his answers to some questions give me a little fear, because I think George McCarter and Bob Hullett, etc., and Rex McClellan will be working very hard. It was a wonderful speech, Frank. Thank you so much.
And how many times do you think will be trips, to the moon or something?
To the moon?
Outer space.
How many times did I go to outer space?
Yeah.
I went once on Gemini 7 in 1965, where I circled the Earth for 2 weeks, and once in December of 1968 on Apollo 8, where we circled the moon. We were the first people to circle the moon.
Okay, en dos ocasiones fue cuando estuvo fuera del espacio, que fue en 1965, que dio vueltas alrededor de... ¿Perdón? 1965, que dio vueltas hacia alrededor de la Tierra. Which other trip you said about another one? 1965? What other one?
Apollo 8, 1968, circled the moon.
Okay. En 1968, alrededor de la Luna.
Mi pregunta era, ¿cuándo habrá pasaje? Si cree que este siglo contemplará pasaje
Or do you think
hacia
it is
espacio.
at what time do you think would be enough people, to go over there?
Back to the moon?
Yes.
I think it'll be a very long time, if ever, in this century.
En mucho tiempo durante este siglo.
No, but the question, I'm sorry to interrupt. The question if you think there'll be a passage, commercial ticket to the moon, okay?
Commercial trips to the moon, I don't foresee for many, 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 many decades.
Bueno, que van a haber muchos en muchas décadas.
Que no lo ve como próximo en las décadas siguientes.
Habló allá dentro de los problemas principales con los que se encuentra la industria de la aviación. ¿Los quiere repetir?
Okay. You talked there in the conference about the problems in aviation. So you would like to repeat some of them?
Yes, I think that the air transportation system will remain the most important public transportation system in the world.
Quiere que lo haga, yo conozco el problema. Él definitivamente piensa que la aviación seguirá siendo el medio de transportación más importante en el mundo.
And the problems that confront public air transportation are common worldwide: inflation and fuel costs.
Los problemas que se enfrenta la aviación en el mundo son comunes y son los altos costos del combustible y la inflación permanente que está en el mundo.
And the great challenge of the people that work in the airlines of the world is to keep the productivity such that we can price our ticket within reach of the average person.
El gran reto que tienen las compañías aéreas en el futuro es mantener la productividad en relación con el precio de los boletos. En otras palabras, es necesario que los empleados de la aviación y la productividad aumenten contra el precio del boleto.
Colonel Borman, Eastern's been in Transcon for, I guess, 4 months now. Are you satisfied with the performance so far? Do you plan to stay, and what's going to happen to service levels?
La pregunta es, I'm translating to Spanish. La pregunta es que Eastern ha entrado al mercado transcontinental de Nueva York a San Francisco, Nueva York a Los Ángeles, que cómo ha resultado esta aventura de Eastern en Transcon.
The answer is yes, we're satisfied. We intend to stay, and the service level will remain the same with the exception of seasonal adjustments that will take place in the winter schedule.
Are you making a profit?
Pardon me?
Are you making a profit?
Not fully allocated, no, but the airplanes are providing, are doing better than they were in their previous application.
La respuesta fue que sí, Eastern continuará volando en esa ruta muy competida que es Nueva York, San Francisco, Nueva York, Los Ángeles, y que mantendremos el mismo nivel de vuelos. Y después se le preguntó que si estaba ganando dinero Eastern y dijo que está saliendo más o menos a mano.
How long can you go on with a fare structure where passengers are paying more to go to the coast than they are to go to Atlanta from New York?
You must mean how they're paying more to go to Atlanta than they are from the coast.
That's right, yeah.
Well, the question, really now that we've upped the $195 fare Transcon it's moot because there is a more expensive ride from the coast than it is to Atlanta.
But not how about day passes?
Not proportionally, but I think the days of proportionate fares went out with deregulation.
O sea, la pregunta era por qué había tantas diferencias de tarifas, en ocasiones una tarifa de un punto a otro que es más cercano es más cara que de un punto X a otro más lejano. Y eso es precisamente los resultados de la desreglamentación en la que están enfrentándose en los Estados Unidos. O sea que hay una situación tarifaria inconsistente en algunas ocasiones. Sí.
No entendí bien. Cuando habla de que es regular las ganancias de Eastern, en términos generales de la compañía en todas sus operaciones.
No, estaban hablando de la transcontinental. San Francisco, Nueva York, Los Ángeles.
Quería que nos hablara algo de Eastern en relación con los proyectos que tienen para aumentar sus vuelos a México, aumentar rutas.
He would like to know the Eastern Airlines plans to expand your services to Mexico.
Yes, Eastern is extremely interested in expanding our service into Mexico. On the 2nd of October, we'll start 2 non-stop jumbo jets, Mexico to Miami. Later on this year, we hope to start service from both New Orleans and Atlanta to Guadalajara, Mazatlan, Puerto Vallarta. We also serve Cancun, Cozumel, Merida, and obviously Acapulco in Mexico. We serve them from New York. We serve Mexico from New York, from Atlanta, from New Orleans, Miami, and Tampa. And we think that there's a great future in commerce between our two countries, and we intend to provide the best possible service.
La respuesta es definitivamente Eastern Airlines, su programa de expansión hacia México es absoluto. El 2 de octubre se inician 2 vuelos jumbos L1011 y A300 a la Ciudad de México non-stop, Miami, México, México, Miami. Y más tarde en diciembre su expansión será hacia Guadalajara, Puerto Vallarta y Mazatlán, volando de Atlanta y de Nueva Orleans. Asimismo, en diciembre se planea volar Atlanta, Cancún, Miami, Cozumel, Atlanta, Mérida, Cancún y Cozumel. O sea, Eastern cierra con eso su paraguas de rutas hacia la República Mexicana.
Por favor, Pancho, ¿no tienes que repetir las últimas del Caribe?
La del Caribe, Atlanta, Mérida, Cancún, Cozumel,
Atlanta, Mérida,
Cancún, Cozumel, así como Miami, Cancún y Miami, Cozumel. Eso es el bilateral que lo habla.
It's Mr. Contreras' job to keep all the airplanes filled up.
Okay.
Nice to see.
Quisiera pedirle una opinión al coronel Borman sobre la utilización y qué rendimiento ha obtenido con el Airbus.
He would like to ask you what utilization and capacity control on the Airbus 300. What results on the Air 300? It's the first airline that has it in the United States. What the results on the A300?
The A300 is is the finest airplane flying today of its class. The utilization, we are using them better than 10 hours a day. They have lower seat mile and plane mile costs than any other airplane of its kind, and we only wish we had more of them.
Dice que el A300 es definitivamente el mejor avión que hay volando en su tipo por su bajo costo en mantenimiento, en utilización, 10 horas diarias, y su bajo costo también de inversión y de gasto de combustible. Que él quisiera tener más aviones de esos en la aerolínea.
Se ha dicho que precisamente debido a la escasez de combustible, muchas líneas aéreas, sobre todo en Estados Unidos, han reducido sus frecuencias o un mejor acomodo. ¿Easter ha reducido frecuencias?
It has been said that because of the fuel cost in the United States and in the world, the airlines' strategy is to reduce frequencies. Is Eastern Airlines has reduced frequencies in their system?
We have reduced frequency some this fall, but in response, not so much to rising fuel costs, because that is certainly a consideration, but the United States is in a very, very deep recession, overall economic recession, that has impacted our entire industry a great deal.
No solamente por el alto costo del combustible, las compañías están tomando decisiones de reducir sus frecuencias, sino que en el caso de Eastern Airlines, en este otoño ha habido una recesión impactante en los Estados Unidos y eso ha contribuido también, el alto costo del combustible y la recesión, a que las líneas aéreas reduzcan frecuencias. Son dos factores importantes. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Borman, how do you honestly feel the effects of deregulation in the current conditions? Would you have been better off?
No, I honestly stand before you as a true convert, and as you know, a convert is often, whether it's religious or economic, is almost often more zealous than the original member of the particular. But I would, as I look back on 1980, I would not like to consider the prospect of Eastern without the ability to place our assets. Yes, ma'am. I think deregulation offers the best possible prospect for the consumer. And to me, that's the bottom line. What can we do for the consumer?
La pregunta fue si el sistema, la desregulación o desreglamento, término en los Estados Unidos, dar su opinión muy personal. El coronel Borman ha expresado y ha dicho... Sí.
¿Regularización o reglamentación?
Desreglamentación. Es desreglamentación. O sea, no control de tarifas en los Estados Unidos. Desreglamentación, es tarifaria. ¿Qué afecto debería tener, su opinión personal? Coronel Borman siempre estuvo en contra de esa situación, pero expresa en este momento que una vez aplicada se ha convertido a ese sistema y expresa también que Eastern Airlines se ha preparado para hacer frente a esta problemática y expresa también que cree que para el consumidor ha sido la mejor decisión y siente que va a tener efectos positivos.
Deregulation has also brought you your new New York-Washington competition. When are you going to be ready with your competitive response to that?
La pregunta es que la desreglamentación trajo también nuevos competidores en rutas donde no había antes aerolíneas. En el New York-Washington se expresa claramente cuándo va a responder en ese sentido la compañía.
We will be ready shortly with any response that we might have. We feel that we're offering a different product and that we will have a guaranteed seat. And we think it's a premium service, and we're looking at it now. But it will be certainly before the middle of October.
Possibility you might not change your fares.
Possibility? It's all being examined now.
Estaremos listos para competir inmediatamente en ese mercado de Nueva York, Washington, y estaremos definitivamente preparados a cualquier asunto de resolución de la competencia contra quien entre ahí. Creo que el señor después.
Two quick questions. Are you any longer interested in the DC-9A?
At this point, we're not interested in the DC-980.
Okay, second part. Are you committed to flying, whether it's the Dash 80, 757, 767, ATMR, or A300?
757, you left out the best one.
No, well, I know you ordered that, but are you committed to flying any or all of those, whatever you may purchase, with 3 men, or are you flexible?
We have only one airplane in that category on order, which is the 757. We have 28 of them on order. We have agreed to fly them with a crew of 3. However, our cockpit is being configured for rapid conversion to a crew of 2 if we are successful in convincing ourselves that and our pilots that the operation is safe in that.
Are you going to try and convince them?
At this point, I think in all realism, it will be a joint effort on the part of the crews and the management. I'm not going to get into a battle over a 3 or 2-man crew, is what he's saying.
But is there an ongoing deliberation with them?
Well, they're working with us on cockpit conversion and so on, but we plan to fly it with 3-man crew.
Dos preguntas rápidas, señor. Preguntó si el DC-980 le interesaba a Eastern, dijo que no, que cuál era el avión que iban a programar para Eastern Airlines, es el 757 Boeing 757, y relacionada que se iban a volar 3 pilotos o 2, eso es una negociación que se va a ir llevando a cabo con los pilotos y la compañía en el futuro.
The answer specifically is 3-man crew.
Específicamente 3.
¿Cuál es el porcentaje global de reducción en frecuencias de vuelos en Estados Unidos y a qué porcentaje se ha reducido para México en ese caso?
What would be the percentage that you feel the frequencies have been reduced in the United States, and if that has affected Mexico?
It has not affected Mexico.
No ha afectado a México.
On Eastern's part.
On la parte de Eastern.
The only thing that affected Mexico was a very, very unfortunate strike that we had here in this summer.
La situación que afectó definitivamente a Eastern en México fue la huelga que se tuvo en este país en la Eastern Airlines.
And we will be increasing our frequencies into Mexico, not decreasing.
Y vamos a aumentar las frecuencias a México y no van a decrecer. The percentage you feel that in the United States, is there any number?
Percentage in the United States, I would estimate it's down 8 to 10%.
Entre 8 y 10% en los Estados Unidos. Global. ¿Sí?
Mr. Borman, what impact have the curfews at so many airports had on air cargo operations?
Well, ma'am, we don't have all cargo operations, so it hasn't impacted us. But I do believe, again, it's short-sighted to put artificial constraints on airports in general. We think the 8:30 or the 9:30 curfew at Washington National is a mistake because we are investing, as you know, hundreds of $millions in quiet airplanes. And again, I think that the prosperity and the economic robustness of the economy demands access to the airports.
Right, and yet there are rumors that the curfew might be made a national law by the government.
May well be. There are a lot of other laws that are just as screwy.
You think it's a mistake?
Yes, ma'am.
Creo que se entendió. Es una pregunta muy relacionada a los Estados Unidos, al aeropuerto de Washington. ¿Hay alguien que quisiera tener alguna traducción?
Son dos preguntas, coronel Borman. Si usted mantendrá su postura para llegar al Senado de los Estados Unidos y si considera que el programa de la conquista del espacio de los Estados Unidos ha venido a menos por los últimos triunfos de los rusos que hasta llevaron a un cubano allá al espacio.
Two questions. Are you going to continue to posture yourself as a future U.S. Senator? No, la primera. Definitivamente.
Comprendo. Bueno.
And number two,
I got enough problems.
Is the program, the space program of the United States will continue its efforts now that the Russians have shown to have a space capsule and have flown a Cuban over there?
Well, aside from the Cuban, which is a pure,
aparte del cubano,
which is a pure political stunt,
que es una situación totalmente política,
because you know Cubans can fly, anyone can fly. It doesn't have to be a regular
Cubanos,
American.
cubanos o cualquiera puede volar, no se trata de
But-
escoger.
The American space program, I think, is vital not only to U.S. security, but to free world security. I'm dismayed at the travail in the shuttle program, and I hope, beyond all hope, that it gets back on track.
Dice que el programa espacial definitivamente es seguridad para el mundo libre y definitivamente se siente defraudado de ver que se ha retrasado el programa espacial de los Estados Unidos y espera que pronto vuelva a estar en un camino positivo.
Frank, in response to that, Frank, I've been wanting to ask you, are we, in light of what you said, are we abandoning our leadership role in space, in your opinion?
I think we've already, maybe not knowingly, but we're certainly, from an operational standpoint, in the past 5 years, well in second place.
Dice definitivamente, la pregunta fue, ¿hemos abandonado un poco el programa espacial en los Estados Unidos? El coronel Borman contesta, definitivamente en los últimos 5 años sí, y somos un buen segundo lugar.
Señor, dado el desarrollo tecnológico actual y los intereses de las grandes potencias, ¿existe la posibilidad de una conflagración, de una guerra espacial?
Due to the fact that the two nations that control and have more complete space programs, do you consider there will be a space war in the future?
I don't think so.
No, no lo piensa.
If I can ask a partly political question. Do you think the status of ADAP, which you referred to at lunch, is reflective of the current administration?
No, I did not. I don't, because this program didn't initiate in the Carter administration. This is a reflection of the.
I mean, it's dispersal.
It's a reflection of the political malaise that exists in this country, not of any single administration.
Okay, one more. Do you think it might change if administrations change?
I've lost hope.
Los problemas del que habló no se trata de culpar a una administración, es una situación de mucho tiempo que se viene cargando, especialmente en lo que él comentó de los Estados Unidos, y él piensa que tienen que mejorarse las administraciones para poder llegar a una